Philosophers like Frantz Fanon and Albert Camus warn us religion can be wielded as a tool of oppression, or a framework humans use to find meaning in an otherwise absurd world. Today we're tackling the separation of church and state, a principle central to American democracy, yet constantly under siege. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This was intended to ensure that no single religion would dominate the political landscape, allowing for a pluralistic society where diverse beliefs could coexist. Yet history shows this ideal has often been tested. Religious rhetoric has justified slavery, opposed civil rights, and shaped policies to protect power. In the modern day, we see Donald Trump established initiatives like the White House Faith Office and an anti-Christian bias task force. We got Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton earlier this month, September. He's advocating for Christian practices in public schools and like saying the Lord's Prayer and displaying the Ten Commandments on the wall. And he characterized the opposition to these measures as part of a broader effort by, quote, twisted radical liberals to, quote, erase truth and, quote, dismantle the solid foundation that America's success and strength were built upon. He framed this resistance as an assault on the moral fabric of society, suggesting that critics were undermining the nation's Christian heritage. Because here's the thing. In our current climate, if you criticize certain right-wing policies, you're often told you're attacking Christianity itself. Christianity has become the shield, the deflection, the line of defense. But what does that say about the health of our democracy if one religion, and let's be honest, one very specific version of Christianity, is being used in such a manner? When Christianity becomes a tool to get votes, get people riled up, to gain support, and to claim Christianity is under attack whenever a certain legal policy is questioned. And imagine being a devout Christian. Like, this is like an overgeneralization and somewhat like an exaggeration, but I feel it's a valid observation about how some religious voters experience political messaging, okay? But imagine being a devout Christian, and you're building your life in like around faith and the teachings of the Bible and surrounding yourself with other people who share this, like the same values as you, these Christian values. And then when you're first exposed to politics and hear a party claim that their policies perfectly reflect God's will, while the opposition is morally corrupt, opposed to God, and a threat to the nation's values. Vote for us, they say, because we uphold God's law and everyone else is blind to it, From the outside, it can feel like faith is being used as a weapon in political arguments rather than a personal guide to life. And let me clarify that not everyone who is Christian is falling for this. Most people are decent. Let's be honest. Most people aren't radical. Most people, when you meet them in person, they're decent. But if you spend enough time online, it feels like half the country is out to destroy the other half, and that they're secretly plotting to take away their way of life. And this paranoia has been building for the past decade, and it's true for both sides. Because I know there are liberals who believe there are a bunch of crazy racist KKK Nazis on the right trying to use Christianity to infringe upon their rights and freedoms. And I'm not too vain as to not believe I am resistant to falling for that narrative either, especially as a black man, An interesting conspiracy theory I heard once was, this theory has no name, but it's that the right uses Christianity and the left uses social injustice to get people to follow them. And, though they both may pass minor policies here and there to appease the followers, there's ultimately some larger objective at play or some other group of people to which they cater to. But I don't have any of the wisdom or knowledge or the facts to back any of that up, but what I can back up is this. We have lost, or perhaps never fully had, a true separation of church and state. In recent years, we've witnessed a resurgence of religious rhetoric in politics. It seems like every time you criticize the political right in America, someone yells, "You're attacking Christianity." No, I'm not attacking Christianity. I'm attacking bad policies. I'm attacking manipulative politicians. And the idea that religion should dictate law for 330 million people who don't all share the same beliefs. The founders knew this. They wrote about it. The First Amendment is crystal clear. It's like, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Why? Because history shows what happens when church and state merge. You don't get freedom, you get tyranny. Thomas Jefferson wrote about a wall of separation between church and state. The First Amendment was supposed to guarantee religious freedom by keeping government neutral. Neutral means not privileging one faith over another and not letting one faith dictate the law. Yet, in American history, it is littered with the state bending to Christian justifications for oppression. First example is slavery. There's a politician like John C. Calhoun who argued that slavery was a positive good, and he backed it up with biblical passages. Then there's segregation, where Alabama Governor George Wallace, standing in that schoolhouse door, invoked God's will in defending segregation. Women's rights, even as late as the Equal Rights Amendment debates in the 70s. Phyllis Schlafly leaned heavily on Christian ideals of natural roles for women. Quote unquote natural roles for women, you know what I mean? To stop progress. Then gay marriage. Don't act like everything that happened in the early 2000s didn't happen. I distinctly remember how Christianity was used to oppose same-sex marriage. Senator Rick Santorum declared in 2003 that legalizing same-sex marriage would destroy the family and go against God's law. A common argument we hear to this day. Interracial marriage. I'm going to rant about this one, okay? But first off, I love all women, black women, white women, Latinas, Asian women, Indian women, Arabic women. I don't care, you know what I'm saying? If there's something uniquely attractive about all of them, you know, I love all women. I don't care. Slide in my DMs, you know, find out, fuck around. And but anyway, yeah, man, interracial marriage. Bible was used against it. You know, opponents claimed that the Bible taught that the races should remain separate, and they use like passages like from Deuteronomy and chapter 7, 3 through 4. Do not intermarry with them, which is originally about Israel avoiding religious idolatry, not race. They took the Tower of Babel story and twisted it around to say like God wanted different nations or races kept apart. They had this the curse of Ham doctrine, where some like white Christian leaders misused the story of Noah's son Ham in Genesis to argue that black people were cursed and destined to serve. And that was tied to slavery and later extended into interracial marriage, portraying it as a violation of God's racial hierarchy. And then there's the church and state reinforcement of it, where the judges and politicians and pastors used Christian rhetoric to defend anti-miscegenation laws, calling interracial unions unnatural or against God's design. An example of this is in the Supreme Court case, Loving versus Virginia in 1967, where a Supreme Court trial judge originally justified the ban by saying Almighty God created the races. There's a quote, Almighty God created the races. He placed them on separate continents, but for the interference with capital H, his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. You know, I'm not making this up. Like, and then the churches themselves would support that shit. Like every Sunday, they'd be up in there hooping and hollering about how demonic it is to have an interracial marriage. And, they talk about how it was a threat to the family order, morality, and Christian civilization. No, don't these exact talking points sound familiar to you? Religion keeps getting weaponized to deny rights instead of to uplift people. And another thing I have noticed is that whenever we overcome this religious barrier, we become more identical to the concept of one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And under God was added in there in 1954 because of the Cold War. And I know everyone's going to ask this one, and it's tricky. Is America supposed to be a Christian nation? Well, culturally, yeah, kind of. When the country was founded, almost everyone was Christian. Laws, holidays, morality, all heavily influenced by Christianity. Some founders even tied civic virtue to Christian principles, but legally, not at all. The First Amendment, I'm gonna say it, says Congress can't make no law respecting religion or banning it. Thomas Jefferson called it a wall of separation for a reason. The law doesn't care what church you go to or if you go to church at all. It's not the law's business. That's why the Supreme Court cases like Engel versus Vitale and Everson versus Board of Education kept striking down government-backed religion. Look them up, man. I just gave you a long list of examples where church and state has not taken place. Facts. I'm not making this up, dude. But anyway, yeah, the phrase in the Pledge of Allegiance under God was added in 1954 during the Cold War, and it wasn't about creating a Christian country. It was about saying, hey, we're atheists, we're not Soviet Russians. It was a symbolic, ceremonial thing. It's not a law. And if you don't believe me, go look it up on a computer. So here's the truth. America was founded by culturally Christian people, sure, but the system itself is secular, neutral, protecting freedom of religion, even the freedom not to believe. And that's the wall we need to defend today. Because once the government starts picking winners and losers in religious based, faith based, that's when the freedom is going to start to crumble. And I know you guys want to talk about Charlie Kirk or Sam Cedar or damn Rush Limbaugh, but you guys don't know who Jonathan Haidt is, Martha Nussbaum, Thomas Nagel, Kwame Anthony, Cornel West, Dr. Wolefi Kite Asante. Nobody knows any of those guys. But they'll tell you all about Sam Cedar, Charlie Kirk, Rush Limbaugh. Let me give you guys some deep thinkers, right? Frantz Fanon is this French philosopher, and he once said, sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. That's exactly how religion gets started, That's exactly how religion gets started as a shield, against progress. It isn't faith, it's fear. And fear makes people easy to manipulate. And there's Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist. He had this framework that he calls moral foundations theory. He says conservatives value things like loyalty, authority, and sanctity more than liberals do. And look, that's not bad. That's not inherently bad. But when sanctity, the sacred, becomes a weapon in lawmaking, suddenly women lose the right to control their bodies. Suddenly gay marriage is a threat. Suddenly teachers can't teach honest history in schools, but we'll touch on that later. We got Martha Nussbaum. She talks about dignity and the capabilities approach, and she says how justice is about whether people are able to live full human lives. If we take that seriously, then religion and politics has to take a step back, because not everyone is Christian in America. Not everyone in America interprets the Bible the same way. And the state's job is to make sure everyone has the freedom to flourish, not to enforce one group's sacred values on another. Cornel West pushes this further. He says democracy requires a deep love of people, especially the marginalized. But if your democracy is run by religious gatekeepers, love shrinks into conformity, and conformity is the enemy of freedom. Yeah. So, yeah, I said something earlier about education. So, like, let's focus on that one for a bit. Um, yeah, we look at education like the parents freak out because they think schools are teaching kids to hate America. But really, schools are just trying to tell the truth that slavery happened, that Jim Crow happened, that Christianity was used by some to defend those systems. Facing that history doesn't weaken us, it makes us stronger. They'll also claim that critical race theory is teaching the white kids to hate themselves for being white, and that's not the case either. First off, CRT itself is an academic legal theory, mostly taught in law schools. It's not the same as a K through 12 history curriculum. We're not messing with the children. We're talking to young adults. By the time they hear any of this, they're 18 in college or older. Secondly, CRT examines how race and racism intersect with law and society, which is the core idea. There's nothing about hating white people in there or attacking America. It's just the truth about how race and racism intersect with law and society. And I think that's something we as Americans should know and understand across the board. What many states ban under CRT is often teaching honest history about slavery, segregation, or systemic racism, not CRT theory itself. And I'm going to go ahead and quote Cornel West one more time. We have to be willing, quote unquote, we have to be willing to stand in the prophetic tradition, to speak truth to power, even when it's unpopular, because silence only enables domination. Yeah, we're just trying to tell the truth, man. Don't be scared of the truth. Don't be scared of the truth, all right? The truth is, white people were kidnapping, enslaving, beating, and hanging people for being black for almost 250 years straight. 250 years straight. After that, they started redlining, Jim Crowing, convict leasing, like that's the prison labor where they sold people who were prisoners in black to like private companies, urban renewal, and like highway construction was going down in black neighborhoods. There were healthcare inequities, like the Tuskegee syphilis study. You go check that out, Tuskegee syphilis study. Employment discrimination. Yes, employment discrimination took place in America. I don't know why. Yeah, but all the way up to today, where we got mass incarceration or using the police against us. You're not scared to do all that, but then turn around and got the nerve to be scared to talk about it. Why? It's because you're guilty. I'm just playing. But no, like that's what guilty people do. Don't tell them that, commit a crime and try to hide it. The irony is that y'all calling everything fake news. Well, look at what the fuck y'all trying to do to the schools and shit, man. If you don't understand my accent, then here goes the translation. It is evident that substantial wealth was historically derived from the exploitation and systemic oppression of marginalized communities. Those in power often cloaked these practices in the guise of divine or moral law, when in truth the driving force was economic gain. Society, in its pursuit of conformity or moral righteousness, frequently accepted these justifications without critical reflection, thereby perpetuating injustice. It is important that this is taught in school, along with the brutality that took place during it. It is akin to our own Holocaust, and we as Americans ought to feel disgusted. How far we have come since then is evident of our pursuit of happiness and establishment of justice and domestic tranquility in America. We must learn from our mistakes, not hide them. And this isn't new. Historically, textbooks excluded slavery's brutality, or it minimized Native American genocide, or it erased women's contributions, all while cloaking America as a Christian nation. And today's critical race theory bans are just the latest version of that control. Conservative politicians like Ron DeSantis and others, like, they'll say critical race theory is an attack on Christian values. Go look it up. Ron DeSantis says that it's an attack on Christian values, and education becomes less about truth and more about enforcing a sanitized narrative that protects a certain religious, political worldview. Okay? So, yeah, separation of church and state. We need it, you know? Abortion is the same thing. I didn't want to touch on this one, but I'll just touch briefly, because even without the concept of God, it's still like it's a touchy subject, and I've never directly been involved. I'm not a woman, you know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying it from a man's perspective and from the perspective of a separation of church and state. But like, the one of the primary arguments against, abortion is Christian ideology. One religious interpretation is dictating laws over millions of people who don't share that belief. And Albert Camus, I'm going to quote him, the great existentialist, wrote about the dangers of absolutes. He said the welfare of the people in particular, he said, and I quote, the welfare of the people in particular has always been the alibi of tyrants. When politicians shout, protect life, but only mean it in one narrow religious sense, they're using faith as an alibi for control. Yeah, women's rights have always been collateral damage in this fusion of church and state. Abortion bans are justified almost exclusively with religious arguments, but before that, think about the contraception bans or the workplace inequality, even denying women the right to vote. Barry Goldwater, a conservative hero, once criticized his own party for letting evangelicals hijack it, saying, politics and governing demand compromise, but these Christians believe they are acting in the name of God, so they can't and won't compromise. When religion sets law, women lose autonomy, and compromise disappears. Have you noticed it's a lot more difficult to meet a middle ground with a lot of these conservatives, the Christian ones, not all of them, not all the Christian ones either, the crazy Christian ones, the radicalized ones, but I don't know. Who knows how many people are like that now? But yeah, it's okay. You don't have to listen to me. I'll just keep quoting some of my favorite philosophers on this, further driving the nail into the coffin of the fact that we don't have separation of church and state and how dangerous it is to live in a society like this. But Frantz Fanon, he once said, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And our mission is simple. This is me. Our mission is simple. Keep the line between church and state strong. If we betray that, we're going to lose politics and we're going to lose freedom. Frantz Fanon also said the church in the colonies is the white people's church, the foreigner's church. She does not call the native to God's ways, but to the ways of the white man, of the master. And that analysis rings true here as well. Religion, when fused with state, often works as a tool of power, not liberation. Albert Camus and the Rebel warned against absolute systems. I said this one earlier, but whether it's political or religious, because they justify oppression in the name of some higher good, isn't that exactly what they're doing when they, use the church like that? Yeah. Jonathan Haidt one more time, because I think he's like a little bit conservative, so you guys might respect him more if you're on that side. But he reminds us that humans moralize quickly, often along group lines, and then justify those positions after the fact. Religion makes that even stronger. It turns politics into this like sacred fight where compromise feels like betrayal. And Kwame, yeah, heavy. Compromise will feel like betrayal. If you try to meet in the middle, or like you meet a lot of these MAGA Republicans or Christian MAGA Republicans that are crazy, they'll say if you're like not all the way in on Trump, then you're not a true Republican even anymore. And Kwame Anthony Appiah, he talks about cosmopolitanism, the idea that we owe obligations to people outside our tribe, outside our faith, outside our borders. That's the real American dream, you know? Not just tolerance, but solidarity. You can believe what you want in your heart, but in public, we build laws that work for everyone. That's Kwame Anthony Appiah, okay? Yeah, man. Here's the thing, when you step away from the screen, when you go to work, to the grocery store, and you talk to your neighbors, most people aren't radical. Most people aren't extremists. They just want to live. They just want to raise their kids or not. They want to love or not. They want to make it through the day. You know what I'm saying? With some dignity at the end of it. And it's the echo chambers, these talk shows, the money men, the Rush Limbaughs, and the Sink Uyghurs, or the Charlie Kirks and Sam Cedars. They thrive on division. They tell us there's a war going on for the soul of the nation, but in reality the war is over whether or not we can remember one simple truth. America works best. America works best when no one's religion runs the government. Alright. So, where are the voices of reason in this controversial splitting time in America? They're there, but they're drowned out by louder, angrier, holier than thou voices who've turned religion into a political weapon. And here's the paradox. If the church truly believed in its spiritual mission, it wouldn't need the state. It wouldn't need to legislate belief. It wouldn't need to suppress education or deny marriage or police bodies. The separation of church and state is not about silencing faith. It's about protecting freedom. Because history shows us, again and again, that when the wall between church and state crumbles, oppression comes rushing in. As we continue to navigate the complexities of our society, let us strive to uphold the values of liberty and justice for all, okay? Ensuring that no single belief system dominates our political landscape. Albert Camus said, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." Keeping church and state separate is exactly that act of rebellion. It's a way of saying no one belief system owns America. No preacher, no president, no politician can take that away. That's where I'll leave us today, not with answers, but with a call to defend the wall. To remember Jefferson's warning. To see through the manipulation. And to reclaim the promise of freedom from the shadow of theocracy, okay? And if we can remember that, okay, we can defend it, maybe we can find domestic tranquility again. Maybe we can live up to the words, a more perfect union. Thank you for joining me today. If you found this discussion insightful, please consider subscribing and sharing this podcast with others. Together we can continue to explore and challenge the systems that shape our world.